Hello, I'm going to celebrate Christmas with you today by reading you a poem by A.A.Milne called King John's Christmas. However, a couple of things first. First of all, if my picture is bleached out, it's not because I've suddenly become pale and interesting. The lighting's going all peculiar. That's the first thing. The second thing is I am recording this a couple of days before Christmas because I'll be rather busy on Christmas Day. So I'm just hoping that when I've made this video, something momentous doesn't happen to cause me to have to ditch it. But then again, maybe I can just push it on to next year. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about A.A.Milne because he was very interesting. Most people know of him as the writer of the Winnie the Pooh stories, but he was a prolific playwright and poet in other ways as well. And he was really very good, and unfortunately, because his most famous work, the surviving work, is for children, people think of him as a lightweight, but he was by no means a lightweight. Anyway, he was born in 1882. In 1913 he got married and moved to a house in Chelsea in London. When World War I broke out, he enlisted in the Royal Warwickshire Regiment and served in France. And during his training period, he wrote his first play, Wurzel Flummery, which was produced in London in 1917. By 1919, having completed one book and several plays, Milne finally achieved financial independence. His play, Mr. Pym Passes By, previously staged in London, was produced by the Theatre Guild in New York City. It was a great success there, as it had been on the London stage, and Milne was very well established as a witty and fashionable London playwright. Then his life changed completely. In 1920, his son, Christopher Robin Milne, was born, and in 1923, during a rainy holiday in Wales, when is any holiday in Wales not rainy? Okay, I'm sorry, Wales. I've been to Wales and it didn't rain once in the 4 or 5 times I've been there, so I'm actually calumnying Wales rather. During a rainy holiday in Wales, Milne began work on a collection of verses for children. The result was When We Were Very Young, published in 1924. This blurb here describes it as whimsical, his work, and yes, I suppose it is. In 1926, he duplicated his earlier success with the publication of Winnie the Pooh, and then The House at Pooh Corner followed in 1927. Then Now We Are Six. Anyway, he became very, I suppose, very wealthy off all of that children's stuff he wrote, but he continued to be a prolific essayist, novelist and poet until his death in 1956. Altogether, I'd say, a life well lived. Now I'm going to make this a bit bigger. Now I do know this poem off by heart, but when I'm reciting it for an audience, I'm sure to forget something. So I'm going to have the text in front of me as well. We all know, just to recap, King John was the guy who gave Robin Hood so much trouble. But you have to remember that John was a pretty dreadful person, but he was no more dreadful than his saintly brother, who was only good because he was out of the country so much, so people thought he would be better. John was just an incompetent administrator, basically. All right, but he has gone down in English history as pretty much a disaster and a terrible person. So making fun of him in this sort of a poem, well, that's sort of low-hanging fruit, really. But despite that, Milne managed to make him a sympathetic character, which is It was a work of genius, really, far better than people give it credit for. However, if you have any kiddies and you want them to hear King John's Christmas, I'll put the text up here, and now I'll read the story. King John was not a good man. He had his little ways, and sometimes no one spoke to him for days and days and days. And men who came across him when walking in the town gave him a supercilious stare, or passed with noses in the air, and bad King John stood dumbly there, blushing beneath his crown. King John was not a good man, and no good friends had he. He stayed in every afternoon, and no one came to tea. And round about December, the cards upon his shelf, which wished him lots of Christmas cheer and fortune in the coming year, were never from his near and dear, but only from himself. King John was not a good man, yet had his hopes and fears. They'd given him no present now for years and years and years. But every year at Christmas, while minstrels stood about collecting tribute from the young for all the songs they might have sung, he stole away upstairs and hung a hopeful stocking out. King John was not a good man. He lived his life aloof. Alone, he thought his message out while climbing up the roof. He wrote it down and propped it against the chimney stack. To all and sundry, near and far, F. Christmas in particular, and signed it not Johannes R., but very humbly, Jack. I want some crackers and I want some candy. I think a box of chocolates would come in handy. I don't mind oranges, I do like nuts. And I should like a pocket knife that really cuts. But oh, Father Christmas, if you love me at all, bring me a big red India rubber ball. King John was not a good man. He wrote this message out and gat him to his room again, descending by the spout. And all that night he lay there, a prey to hopes and fears. I think that's him a-coming now. Anxiety bedewed his brow. He'll bring one present anyhow, the first I've had for years. Forget about the crackers and forget about the candy. I'm sure a box of chocolates wouldn't come in handy. I don't like oranges, I don't want nuts, and I have got a pocket knife that almost cuts. But oh, Father Christmas, if you love me at all, bring me a big red India rubber ball. King John was not a good man. Next morning, when the sun rose up to tell a waiting world that Christmas had begun, and people seized their stockings and opened them with glee, and crackers, toys and games appeared, and lips with sticky sweets were smeared, King John said grimly, as I feared, nothing again for me. I did want crackers, and I did want candy, and I know a box of chocolates would come in handy. I do love oranges, I did want nuts. I haven't got a pocket knife, not one that cuts. And oh, if Father Christmas had loved me at all, he would have brought a big red India rubber ball. King John stood by the window and frowned to see below the happy bands of boys and girls all playing in the snow. A while he stood there watching and envying them all, when through the window, big and red, there hurtled by his royal head and bounced and fell upon the bed an India rubber ball. And oh, Father Christmas, my blessings on you fall, for bringing him that big red India rubber ball. Merry Christmas, everyone, and a Happy New Year.